Next, we're going to move on to Gary Chafee's book, Technique Patterns. And Technique Patterns is it's a sticking exercise on page 57 that we're going to look at, and it deals with combinations of singles and double strokes with accents. So the way that I usually practice them is I do only the second half. So when you get the book, you're going to notice it's written as a 2-bar phrase, and you're not going to play the first bar, or you can and probably should, but I'm only going to demonstrate the second bar. And here's what the second bar looks like, written out, played just on snare drum. So the way that I like to manipulate these patterns or create variation is to take the accented note and move it over to the tom-toms. And if you do that, you could have something like this. And of course, if you played it fast, it sounds pretty cool. You could also move it around a little bit, so you don't always have to have that pattern. And of course, if you have more tom-toms than I have here, the sky's the limit. So you could do something like this. And yeah, and then you would take it from there and move things around a little bit more. So the next thing that I usually have people do is move those accented notes over to a cymbal and apply a bass drum note with it to give it a little backbeat, a little, pump. So here's what it would sound like if you did that. And you could do it a little faster, be like this. Again, I'm trying to create a motion here of up and down and around the kit. So you won't play these patterns when you're playing with a band or in your group. You'll play stuff like it, or you'll use the technique that is here, and it'll come out and you're playing naturally. Okay, so the next thing to do is move it over and play a groove pattern. You would still keep the same stickings as they were before, only you'll put your right hand on the hi-hat, assuming you're right-handed, and you'll keep your left hand on the snare drum, and you'll put a bass drum note wherever you see an accented right hand and just pop the left hand on its accent. It'll sound like this. You could also apply open hi-hat notes wherever you see an accent. And so you would play a bass drum and an open hi-hat note together, and it would sound like this. The next thing that I usually like to have people do is play an open double stroke wherever you see an accent. So originally the pattern on the snare drum was this. But now you're going to play this. Another way that you could enhance your ability to control your sticks is to do a buzz stroke or a close stroke every place that you see the accent. You might slow this one down a little bit because it's kind of hard to control that buzz, and it would sound like this. Again, work through all the patterns. There's probably 100 at least in that section of Gary Chafee's technique books. It's beginning on page 57. Remember also that I'm only showing you the second half of that pattern. It begins with a paradiddle, and then it has a varying second part to it on all of them. The next thing that I usually have people do is to flam the accent. So instead of playing this, you would flam the accent and it would sound like this. Again, go through all of them because all of them are different and it would help you. If you don't know what a flat flam is, it's when two notes hit at the same time. The flat flam works really well to move around on the tom-tom. So you could play the flat flam and it would look like this and sound like this. And again, work on all of them because they'll all have different patterns. So finally, the last thing I usually have people do is play this as a like sort of a hybrid Latin pattern. If you apply a Bayonne foot pattern to this sticking, you could move your right hand over to the ride cymbal, keep your left hand on the snare drum, and you would create sort of a hybrid Latin pattern. The Bayonne foot pattern, for those of you who don't know what it is this. It's basically one bass drum alone, one hi-hat alone, a bass drum alone, and then together. So, and if you play this pattern fast and move over and use that sticking, like I said, it'll sound like this. Again, go through all the patterns because they're all so different and each one will feel different against that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time. We're going to check out jazz, Latin, Afro-Cuban, a little bit of African stuff, and perhaps some linear drumming. Thanks for watching. Take care.